Chapter 5 A New Life AD 1177, 2nd January.
Well, now you know a little more about me, the Black Wolf said to the Frisian, yawning. Namely, that some nights I sleep like shit and stupidly even scream occasionally while doing so.
He alluded to his most recent dream. At the last words, however, he paused and thought. The horse, meanwhile, was blithely munching on crunching frosty grass.
The last dreams.
He eyed his raised left hand. It was in a leather glove that merged into a bracer.
That must be about a year ago now, since Akira and I were at Falcon's Reach Fortress so we could deal with her father and... well...
He clenched his left into a fist so that the leather creaked.
No one but the two of us must know.
He reminded himself as his gaze traveled to the still chewing Assar.
Well, alright. He probably won't blab it out so easily either.
It was a name he had given the horse a few days ago. He felt it was appropriate after it had already allowed itself to be used as a pillow several times now. Patting the animal on the flank, he took the lead in his hand and said,
Come, not far from here should be a village they call the Furdale.
With the movement of his eyes, he invited to look around, where mostly sad trees grew. He inclined his head to Assar.
Guess why?
After a few seconds for consideration, he added,
The people here can be so creative.
While the snow crunched under his boots as he walked, it almost completely muffled the clatter of the horse's hoofs. The wanderer let his gaze reach behind him, next to his feet, and finally to the front, where the first snow-covered cottages of the village already announced themselves in front of the morning sun. Wisps of smoke rose from some of the chimneys. He couldn't help but notice that the further one went into the highlands of Lona, the less the paths, even the paved ones, were trodden.
Seems the war in the south against the dwarfs of the Ironheim clan is demanding more and more attention from the consecrated plate,
he muttered to himself, then thought,
I wonder if he is there, at the front, commanding the troops, or if Killian is keeping him close for fear of the curse coming true in the end.
If he had his way, the king could have died. The country would then certainly fall into chaos, somewhat at least. Perhaps even the dwarfs would break through the border walls. The resulting hustle and bustle would certainly give him the opportunity to flee Zangtor and leave all this behind for good. With all the wanted posters and his mark on them, it was currently impossible to get past the border posts or to grab a boat ride in any port.
But,
he muttered to himself again,
if I do manage to do that, where would I go then?
The deserts of Kimio seemed to him at best a place to visit for a few weeks on holiday. The same was true of the swamps and jungles of Arashkar. The tall grim mountains were out of the question anyway, as the dwarfs would certainly not be well disposed towards humans at those times. Maybe those of the Pligor clan, but he didn't want to know about that anyway. He already suspected that a mere visit was probably enough to become entangled in their politics. He could not reach the floating Thunderbeak Islands without the help of a Jimira. All that was really left was
Naheluia.
He whispered the name of the land of the elves.
Perhaps we are destined to go and continue our lives there?
He asked Assar, stroking his flank.
Now that you have an elvish name. Unfortunately, your knowledge of women will be of little use to us because the current leader is, as far as I know, a guy. He's supposed to be the last surviving light elf.
He sighed.
Once again, I'm too far into tomorrow and not enough into today.
In front of them, a couple of hooded crows flew from one tree to another.
I don't know which type you are, but I'm someone who doesn't believe that his fate rests in the hands of any divine powers anyway. You know what I mean.
He made a roaring motion with his wrist.
Gods, prophecies, oracles, the whole shebang. I think the forging of one's own future is also in one's own hands.
He looked at Assar.
Or hooves.
Then shook his head.
And not somewhere in the stars.
Then he shrugged his shoulders and added casually,
Of course, if I have that kind of attitude, it's only natural if there's such a Thorin or other gods that they'll shit in my day.
Assar snorted and nudged his shoulder with his brown muzzle.
Hey, what are you doing? Don't you like my way of talking?
The stallion neighed curtly.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
The green eyes returned his gaze in silence.
Well, then you must realize that we have to be on our guard. Maybe you'd better think about running away, you know. Life with me is not easy. I'm being hunted.
Either the horse didn't understand what he was saying or he didn't care. In any case, it trotted merrily on its 3 legs. Since the vet's visit, it generally seemed more lively, and even the wound on its 4th limb was no longer festering. Gradually, the village was getting close enough that it was time. The wanderer took a deep breath and pulled his hood over his head.
And I'm telling you, this time he even murdered a child.
In and of itself, the tavern was buzzing with activity. Music was playing, the fire was crackling warmth into the room, and laughter filled it. But unfortunately, he had to catch the very corner where people handed each other scary stories instead of a mug of beer. And apparently, to his regret, the Black Wolf was increasingly a favorite topic. The most chatty among them was a rotund fellow who sat in the chair as if he had been born with it.
I'm telling you, I wouldn't be surprised if there had been cases like this before. Only in those cases you couldn't tell who it was, but it was certainly the Black Wolf.
Came from a slim young fellow who looked as if he earned his meals by dragging others with his tongue into the mud or cheating at gambling. The fat man pointed with his thumb towards him.
That's what I'm talking about. Haven't experienced anything like this since all them times.
What can I get you?
A woman's voice suddenly asked him. The wanderer looked up and gazed into the brown eyes of a landlady. She looked good. So good, in fact, that he was sure that many a hand would probably stray to her curves on its way to the jug instead. But so far that didn't seem to be the case, and in her eyes he could see why. She knew how to punish those hands.
Why are you gawping at me like that? Are you deaf? Can you not speak? I beg your pardon. Bad habit of mine, so...
He rummaged around in his belt pouches when she already sighed.
Not another one of those. Hey, I have money, it's just...
His search became more and more acrobatic until he reached his hand behind the leather harness and stuck half his arm behind it as he dug, until finally he pulled out the round thing. He laid it down for the woman.
What is this? Well, this is what is commonly called payment. What can a lonarum get? No. That's not a lonarum.
The wanderer shrugged his shoulders with a slight smile.
Well, it may not be the lonarum. We don't need to argue about that at all. But it is a lonarum. Look.
He took the thing and started scratching it with his thumb. The hard dirt on it started to crumble off, and on the front of it one could now see a 1 surrounded by ears of corn.
Huh?
He held out the coin to her, which with magnanimity could be described as once silver. Her iron gaze looked at him wordlessly. Now that she was also shaking her head, he took the coin again and began to scratch the other side free. There, a man now began to picture himself holding a sword in front of him, the tip of which was touching the ground. The hilt was in front of his lap and his hands rested on the pommel.
One can easily see that this is Sloaner,
the wanderer affirmed and held the coin out to her again. Asar's attention was caught when the door was flung open and his companion came flying out of the tavern and landed face first in the slushy snow.
Just because we are a tavern in a village doesn't mean all the riffraff can snow by.
It echoed from one of the 2 burly fellows who were kind enough to show him the way out of the door. He had just propped his upper body off the ground with his forearms so that his face at least was no longer dipping in the grey-brown snow when something occurred to him.
What about my coin? We'll keep that thing so we can smack it around the ears of the next person who tries to screw us over so stupidly.
With a crash, the door was closed and the lively laughter continued to roar undisturbed faintly outside through the closed windows. He felt something tugging at his hood. From the audible smacking he knew immediately that it was Asar tugging at him. Straightening back on his feet and knocking the dirt off himself to some extent, he held his hand over his grumbling stomach. Sighing out in one long puff, he said,
Looks like I'll have to get some work, although...
He looked at Asar and asked,
I've tried it before, but... Do you think if I hold out long enough I can eat the stuff you make do with? Maybe I can live off it.
Whether it was because of an annoying fly, or because the Frisian actually understood what he was being told, the animal shook his head.
Nah, didn't think so either.
Please don't hold it against the people. A boy's voice suddenly spoke to him. Looking over his shoulder, he recognized the lad, who was just reaching over his belt with his hat.
You know, many people come through this village recently.
Grumbled the wanderer. It was obvious to him. Those who had their possessions close to the southern border to the Talgrim Mountains, they naturally didn't want to see them burned by war. Even if it was quite unlikely so far that the wall would not withstand the dwarves.
The shop can't choose its customers, and mostly it's just these travelers who come through every now and then.
The child's voice triggered a scratchy feeling behind his chest. It sounded like that of someone who was used to being subjugated to a rod for a long, long time.
Say, you live here, don't you?
Yes, my lord.
Don't call me that. I'm nobody's lord. Now listen, do you think someone like me could find work here for a few days? Could be all sorts of things.
Even washing clothes and scrubbing the floor? As the boy grinned cheekily, the wanderer now turned and got down on one knee to be at eye level with the lad.
Why do you ask like that?
He inquired in a firm tone. Immediately the boy took a step back. He held his hands in front of his lap, bowed his head and shook it.
Because it is more the work of a washerwoman after all, and, well...
And what?
I don't dare to tell.
Out with it.
You don't look like one to me. Word of honor. I just wanted to say that you look more like someone who knows how to fight. With swords and all.
Sighing, the wanderer rose to his feet and turned back.
Wait!
The boy had caught up with him again and was now walking beside him.
You are hungry, are you not?
In a world like this, pretty much everyone is hungry, boy.
Wow. You talk like some book.
The wanderer took notice and the child continued.
Well, at least some of them my mother reads to me from time to time.
So your mother can read?
Oh yes. Pretty impressive, isn't it? But...
The just awakened gleam in his eyes succumbed to a languor.
But she's not doing so well these days.
What's the matter? The boy grabbed the wanderer by the left and held it in his little hands, something about which the young man's whole body tensed. But this went unnoticed by the boy.
You have to promise me really hard that you won't tell anyone.
Carefully he freed his hand from the boy. He really didn't seem to have noticed anything. He then gave him the most determined nod possible. Now spit it out. It seems to be burning on your tongue already.
My father is a lousy asshole.
Whoa! He put out his right hand on the child's back and walked with him into an alley between two houses. If your mother is so well read, surely she told you what Thorin does to those who don't honor their parents and take words like that.
I don't care about that. It is true after all. If Thorin really were so good, why doesn't he come out of the clouds and punish my father for what he is doing to my mother?
The little boy looked into the man's blue-green eyes. A strand of his black hair had fallen over his forehead, and he would have liked to ask him how he got the scar across his left eye, but he didn't dare. Yet there was something in them that he could connect with, a feeling he knew so similarly when he was with his mother. Somehow he felt he could tell this man anything. What does he do? The latter asked him after a few seconds of silence. It was visibly difficult for the boy to tell. He struggled to hold back the tears. His hands were clenched into fists, and he had his eyes averted to the side. Hey, he heard the man say in a warm voice. Go ahead, and let it out.
Man, don't cry.
We can make it our secret. The boy looked up at him, and before he knew it, the child had thrown himself against his chest and started sobbing. He put his hand behind his head and the other on his back. It's really hard to be strong sometimes, isn't it? Especially when you have to do it alone with ingratitude. The boy stayed like that for a while. Then he told him how his father often came home in the evening and beat his mother because the food wasn't to his liking, or the floor was dirty, the bed not properly made, the clothes not clean enough. What does your father work as?
Woodcutter.
He had an idea why the boy had addressed him in the first place. So he rose again, took the boy by the hand and asked, What do you say you show me where your mom lives and we'll give her a hand?
Yes, that's what I wanted to ask. But I didn't dare because it's not such a man's work and you look so, well, adventurous. But my mom cooks such delicious food. I'm sure she won't mind if you pay us a visit.
You mentioned your father will be back in the evening, right?
Yes.
The wanderer looked at the sun, which was now at noon. Come, he finally said, and let the child show him the way.